Israel's economy looks strong, but beneath the headlines, something is wrong. In just the first 3 months of 2026, real unemployment went from 4% to over 16% of the workforce. More than 15,000 construction jobs were lost. More than 85,000 units remain unsold. That's more than 3 years of inventory, according to current demographic trends. Corporate media isn't reporting this, though, and all the agents keep saying the same rhetoric.
Real estate in Israel always goes up.
Meanwhile, workers are disappearing from the labor market, housing remains out of reach, and AI looks like it's going to accelerate the disruption. So the question remains, what happens to the housing industry when people can't afford rent and they can't afford the mortgages that they signed on? Join us as we unpack and deep dive everything from housing finance to housing tech and the developments going on in the periphery. The numbers are real, the consequences coming. The choice is yours. Join us. Streaming now on tribejournal.org.
Brought to you by the Tribe Group, identifying and investing in affordable housing solutions so that everyone can thrive in a world of abundance.
In the first quarter of 2026, real unemployment in Israel has risen by over 1,000%. More than 700,000 people have been out of work, out of a 4.3 million person workforce. In today's episode, I'm not interviewing anyone. I am showing you the stats and facts behind the labor market, which from every benchmark that I can see is in serious trouble. There is a lot of catastrophe that is underreported, and the numbers that are reported are grossly understating the carnage that is being felt on the streets. Before we try to understand the ramifications of what has happened, let's first get into the stats and facts and understand what went down in Israel. So before we can really understand the numbers we're going to look at, we have to first understand what is the unemployment statistics. So there's a Central Bureau for Statistics in Israel. The United States has a similar one. All the numbers that we're going to be going through are from the cbs.gov.il website. Go check it out. If you think I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments or direct message me. Happy to be wrong, especially on this crazy data. Okay, let's jump right in. The first thing we want to understand is what is the unemployment statistics. There are many different benchmarks that help us understand what's happening in the labor market. One of those benchmarks is unemployed persons, which is basically someone who's been searching for a job in the past 30 days. This does not include a lot of people. For example, if a person is a lawyer and they are billing out at $1,000 or shekels an hour, and then they lose all their clients but one, they're technically employed. They may be billing out an hour a week. They're underemployed, but they're still not hitting this unemployed category. Another example would be someone who gave up, someone who has been unemployed for quite a while. They once owned a company. Maybe they're 40 or 50, maybe they're 20, whatever it is. And they gave up looking for a job when their company sank. They may have been an employee of a company and they were fired, and they got totally discouraged and stopped looking for a job after 6 months of complete failure finding a job. This is a huge issue. It's not included in this stat. So when we talk about or hear about or read about the 3.2 in January, 2.6 or 2.5% unemployment number, that is not including the full picture. People are walking around in states of quiet desperation. They lost their job, they're underemployed, and yet the economy looks like it's booming because unemployment has gone down consistently January, February, and March. Let's take a look at some other categories that are going to paint a little bit of a different picture. The main category we're going to focus on today is the people who are employed persons who are temporarily absent from work all week due to economic reasons. Let's say a person has a good job and they've been working it for 10 years or 2 years, whatever it is. And suddenly there's no money. Like the company is struggling. They will furlough the good workers in order to keep them on board, even though they have no money to pay them. So they'll say, don't come to work this month. We can't pay you, but hopefully next month it will be better. So this is called employed persons temporarily absent from work all week due to economic reasons. So these are people who are not unemployed or underemployed. These are people who are literally employed, but are told not to come to work this month. So that number is skyrocketing enormously. And when we look at the data, and we're going to tick and tie this for you on the film, we'll show you the sources for this. But when we look at January, for example, we see that the number, when we combine both unemployed persons and these economic displaced persons, so we see that in January, that number was 162,000 people, right? So this basically, if we come down to here, unemployed persons was 145,000 and absent for economic reasons was 1,680. So in January, there was about 16,000 people that were absent for economic reasons. That number in February shot up to 205,000. So when I saw this, I was shocked. More than 1,000% increase in the number of people who are not working because of economic reasons. They're gainfully employed, but they're not gaining anything. Like they're not earning revenues that month. So I said to myself, okay, hopefully that's a spike and it will come down in March. So at the end of April, when they released the data, I quickly checked it and it didn't just not come down, but it actually more than doubled from February's elevated numbers. So when it went from 204,000 all the way up to 591,000, we are dealing with a major, major red flag on our economy here. So the total number of people who are not in the labor force for March is 15.8%. That is an enormous number. When you bring in these other categories as well, by the way, we see persons on the labor force who stopped working due to dismissal or closure of the workplace during the last 2 years. And we also see discouraged workers. Let's just go back a little bit and tick and tie these. So from the website of the cbs.gov.il, all this will be on tribejournal.org. When we look at the website, here's the numbers that we pulled this data from. We see that these numbers are catastrophic. So that's January and February. Just want to show you March, tie that in. Here's February and March. Okay, here's our economic reasons number. March is 705,000 people. Again, that combines the unemployed persons and the employed persons temporarily absent from work all week due to economic reasons. So those numbers, that's the 705,000 there. It's 15.8%. But when we add everything together, we see a very disturbing picture. I'm going to bring up the infographic now. Okay, here's our infographic. We have Israel's 2026 economic displacement crisis. Israel's 2026 economic displacement crisis, the surge of real unemployment. This data is from the Israel Central Bureau of Statistics. The infographic is by tribejournal.org and the Tribe Group. Now, when we look at the surge in real unemployment, this is the broad measure of unemployment, including discouraged workers and those absent for economic reasons. It soared from 4.2 in January, 16.6 by March. The total people in this category jumped from 191,600 to 747,400. This is an enormous jump in one quarter, as you can see by the graph here. Let's break this down. The Great Displacement, January to March 2026. So 145,000 jobs were unemployed. That's what you'll see in the media. In February, it went down to 117. Looks pretty good. Economy seems to be doing well. Then it went down to 113 or 114,000 in March. So far, if you were reading the headlines, it looks pretty good. The GDP is going up, the market's going up, unemployment's down. Sounds pretty good, right? But once you factor in this number, the economic absences, we see a tremendous crisis evolving in real time. The real unemployment rate is very, very broad. We're going to focus on one of these categories, right? We have other categories down here, but these numbers are just dominating the change in the numbers. The majority of the increase is coming from one particular category, which is absent for economic reasons. People who were not fired from their jobs, but they were told not to come into work. They are not getting paychecks. They are not working, but they are technically employed. That is this orange-red category. It started with 16,000. That's a very small number in January, shot up to 204,000, 205,000 in February. Absolutely mind-boggling. I was hoping it was going to spike and go back down to the 16,000 or whatever it would be, but it did not. In March, it shot up even further, more than doubled to 592,000. This is an enormous rate. That's a huge number considering the amount of people, 4.469 million in the labor force of that population. 113,900 are unemployed. And of those who are technically employed, nearly 4.4 million people, 19.6% are not working for a variety of reasons. That is 854,000 people. But it is the 591,900 people, which is 13.6% of the total employed persons who are absent for economic reasons. Check this out. We got a basic total of all of these, just these two categories, these two main categories, 705,800. So this is an enormous number of people, percentage-wise, who are unemployed, right? When we add in these other categories, which are not on the graphic, the category of dismissal or closure of workplace during the last 2 years, and they never went back to work, and then the discouraged workers, which is somewhat insignificant compared to the hundreds of thousands of people that are out of work. So when we look at this, the total of the two top categories is 15.8%. 15.8% of all of the labor market are either unemployed or they're temporarily absent for economic reasons. The total, when you include the other categories, is 16.6%. That's over here. And we see there's an enormous surge in absences for economic reasons. So this is a huge problem. It's underreported. Now, someone might say, I know what you're thinking. There's a war. Maybe because of the war, there are reserve duty people that are pulled out of their workplace and sent to the front lines or supporting the war effort, working for the IDF. And we see that that's remained consistent. Not just that, but when we look at the website of the Central Bureau of Statistics, the CBS, we see that they're actually breaking these down in different ways, that the reserves are a different category than the economic reasons. So not only are they consistent from month to month, right? They haven't really shot up or down that much over the first quarter, but they are also recorded separate from this number, as far as I could tell. So we got major carnage here. This is a big problem. It's underreported. And the question is, what are the ramifications of this type of activity in the labor market? So let's just jump in. So when we look at the GDP versus unemployment, we're seeing a very different picture emerge as AI begins to displace jobs. Now, that means that basically you would be able to see a correlation. There's this Oken's rule. Some don't like it, but for the most part, it's commonsensical to understand that there should be a correlation between unemployment and GDP. What is GDP? GDP is essentially, according to the International Monetary Fund, the GDP, it basically measures the monetary value of financial goods and services, that is, those that are bought by the final user, produced in a country in a given period of time, like a quarter or a year. It counts all of the output generated within the borders of a country. GDP is composed of goods and services produced for sale in the market and also includes some non-market production, such as defense or education services provided by the government. An alternative concept, the GNP, gross national product, counts all the output of the residents of a country. So if you have a German-owned company producing things in the United States, then that would be counted for the GDP of the United States. So it's the gross domestic product is essentially determined by within the borders. Now, here's the thing. What happens if you have a company that uses robotics or uses artificial intelligence to essentially make money and factory, like Amazon, it makes, the GDP goes up. It's within that border, but the employment rate at Amazon might go down. So the number of employees, as people start reducing their employees, as corporations start firing people and replacing them with AI and replacing them with robotics, the GDP will theoretically continue to rise because that company is becoming more and more productive, even though the salaries and wages are going down. So what we see is that traditional KPIs, key performance indicators, are no longer relevant. Why? Because we have a detachment ahead, or currently, that is a detachment between the GDP, the productivity of corporations and countries, and the number of people who are taking home paychecks. So it used to be that you might be able to determine more easily a correlation. If the employment is down, if unemployment is down and everybody's working, then you'd expect the country and the economy to be cranking. But nowadays, with AI and robotics and other factors, we cannot rely on unemployment to be a determination of the productivity and the health of the economy. So, in other words, the overall economy might be booming, but the unemployment might be telling a very different story for citizens on the ground. So the need for new metrics is obvious. We need new metrics. We need to rethink how we're looking at the economy. And, without a doubt, the regular unemployment, this is in the United States, this is in Israel, it's all over the world. You need to look a little bit deeper than what the media and the government agencies are reporting, so to speak. Well, not the government agencies, it's really just the media. So the media might report everything's fine and dandy, but as we see in Israel, it's not so simple to have over 16% of people out of work. Let's shift over to the real estate market. How is this going to impact the real estate market? Okay, I don't have a crystal ball. You don't have a crystal ball. But at the end of the day, if people don't have jobs, they generally don't have rent. There's a lot of people in many of the chat groups that are talking about Aliyah, they're talking about housing. And in Israel, there's always been the housing crisis. Well, at tribejournal.org, we've been breaking down the housing crisis. It's a very complicated picture. Right now, there are 85,000 plus units that are just not selling. So what that means is that new units are coming onto the market, but no one's buying them. There's a number of reasons why. We have that in a different video. I'm not going to get into it in depth now. But the basic gist of it is that the cost of these apartments are either targeting a different, like the top, let's say, 2 or 3 deciles, or the top 50%, and then the bottom 50% are left without anything but a prayer. And so we have this surplus, which is like a 2 or 3 year surplus based on demographic projections, where 85,000 units are just not selling. When we look at the construction titans, I'm going to call them, these giant corporations that build the towers and they build the housing developments, the construction titans sold north of 20 billion shekels of equity in their companies, and they sold over 120 billion shekels of unsecured bonds to generate cash. Now, why is that happening? People are stopping to buy. That's number one. Everyone says that and also the banks cut them off, because if there's a surplus and the banks just keep lending, and there's a surplus, then the prices of property are sure to go down. So when every agent in Israel says the same rhetoric, in Israel, how the price of housing always goes up. It may be good to close a deal. It may be good to get someone to jump and buy a house. But in terms of accuracy, we've seen a correction in 2025 in most parts of the country. And I think we will probably see that trend continue by all these measures. We're going to get into more measures. That's not the only one. So again, the reason why the construction companies do not make affordable housing is in part because of the tax structure and who they're targeting. So when it's, there's also the periphery, which is much more affordable. But when you need to work, it's tough to drive 2 hours or, whatever it is to your place of employment. So this is another part of the challenge that people in the lower five deciles, lower 50% of breadwinners are facing. In addition to that, the rental market is high, so these people who are paying, they're getting their rent is increasing year after year, and they're finding it more and more difficult to pay that rent. Another point I'd like to share briefly is that these 1090 deals, when a person, they have to put down 10% now, and later on they can pay 90% of the purchase price of a new apartment. So a lot of real estate here is bought on paper. A person will put a deposit of 10% down. So if it's a 2 million shekel apartment, that would be 200,000 shekels. If it's a 3 million shekel apartment, it would be 300,000, etc. That's the 10% down. And then after it's built 2 years later or whatever it is, person moves in, and a lot of these people, these companies were making deals that it's not until 18 months later that you have to pay your first mortgage payment. Okay, so this is a huge opportunity to have like 3 or 4 years that you don't have to pay a penny other than the first 10%. What happened was the government, the securities agencies basically slapped them on the wrist and said, you're overstating your books. Those assets, those purchase prices do not reflect the value of the asset. The reason why is because you gave finance deals that made it more valuable to that particular person, but when they go to resell it, those deals will be unavailable. So these adjustments happen around the same time. This just adds another layer of tension to the housing and construction markets. Another important point is that the government owns 90% of the land in Israel. This is a huge number. I mean, to try and explain this to people from the United States, there is a ton of land that the government owns, but there's also enormous swaths of land in nearly every state that are just, they're empty. So, and even when it's in a city, the way it works is if you buy a number of houses on a street and you believe that you are going to be able to build, fill apartments. If you build an apartment building, then you might go to City Hall and get some zoning and try to transform those 3 apartment buildings, 2 families or whatever, into one big apartment building. Here, the way it works is the government says, we want to see a tower, or we want to see 2 families or 5 families. Usually here in Beit Shemesh, for example, it's like a 10 to, you're talking about 8 to 12 stories now. They're building what looks much more like, not Manhattan quite, but Queens and the like, where you're building these tall buildings. This is throughout Eretz Israel and Ashdod, outside of Tel Aviv in the central Israel area. You name it. This is Kiryat Gat. These are all tall buildings. Many of those, which I just mentioned, are much higher than 8 to 12 stories. So the bids that people bid for are based on pre-zoned packages. So the government says, we want to see X amount of units on this many dunam, and then they say who wants to build them and sell them. And so that is very, very centralized. A lot of power in the position of government to determine whether or not. Now, I'm just going to say incidentally that, in the United States, you have to disclose every property you own if you're holding a position that would impact these markets, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But here in Israel, it is not required, even though it's ethical. And that disclosure is something that I think is very relevant. I mean, if you have someone who's determining how much land to release, that's in a position of power, and they themselves have 20 million shekels of real estate investments, and by releasing more and more land, they may actually create a surplus that hurts their investment portfolio by the sum of 5 million shekels. Or that's a potential conflict of interest. At a minimum, it's a bias. So to disclose that is not a law here, but it's definitely a highly encouraged and ethical thing to do. Anyway, so that's the just a bullet point, a very rough overview of the impact that the government has, how much control they have to be able to, release land for specific purposes like affordable housing. I'm not talking about projects. I mean, you're talking 90% of the land is owned by the government. There is a lot of land here. It is not being developed, at least not legally, by the Jews or, and the Arabs are certainly doing their thing. When you flip over to Judea Samaria, aka the West Bank, you see that it's very interesting out there. The whole system is different. We're not going to get into this now. Maybe for another video, if you're interested, let me know. But basically, the point here is that the impact that unemployment has on real estate is a serious question. So if you have people right now who are employed that are looking into purchasing developments, an apartment or something, or a house in a development, and they're employed, gainfully employed, and they go in and they say, look, we're gonna buy on paper now. It's gonna be ready to move in 2 years. Well, with AI increasing exponentially and the impact on the job market that it's already having, I mean, it is really interesting to think what will happen to the banks, what will happen to the construction companies that built these houses when they get stuck in the middle. So when we look at the 85,000 finished units that aren't selling, we also have to look at how many are not finished and what the duration of those are to really understand the impact of this job market. So again, if the way these builders will operate, if they don't have enough financing, they're going to be cut short and they won't be able to finish the projects. So it could be that people who were once employed and had money to put down for a down payment lose their job because of AI or whatever it is, and then they're not able to buy that house. They're not able to pay as the work in progress becomes due, meaning the construction company needs more and more. So someone, either the investor who is helping the builder with the project, or the people who have already been vested in, they continue to invest in the product that they bought on paper. So someone's going to be left holding that bag. The people who are not going to be holding that bag are the agents that basically say, yeah, everything in Israel is going up. Buy now. If you buy now, you'll be set in 2 or 3 years because everything's going up. This is a huge issue. Like if a person they work hard all their lives, and right now they're employed and they have 200,000 shekels for a 2 million shekel apartment, and they put that 200,000 shekels in a 1090 deal, or it's 400,000 or 600,000, whatever it is that they have to put down to get that apartment secured, but then they lose their job. What happens to that down payment? Are they going to be able to recap that down payment? What was the mortgage? These are things that one should consider when they're negotiating mortgage payments, mortgage agreements with banks, because who gets the first rights? The liens on the property usually go to the mortgage holder. So if midway through the person is at 1.2 of spending, they put 600,000 down, and it's then the bank put in another 600,000 to get it to where it is, and then at the end of the day, they may lose that 600,000 or whatever their down payment was, because the property value will not be able to be sold at the price that they thought in 2026 when they signed, or 2025 or 2023 when they signed. So you have people who even 3 years ago signed and did this maneuver, and now their mortgage is going to be coming due. Will the banks give that person a loan? Are they employed? If they're employed now, will they be next year? And so on and so forth. So that sets us up for the forecast being difficult to predict. So the question is, you have a number of paths that this could go. One is a major crash or a significant adjustment, maybe a minor adjustment. I highly doubt it. The thesis here is, what happens when no one has jobs? Can they pay rent? Can they pay mortgages? And so if there's an investor class, which I think the data that I saw, you're talking a major portion, majority of the housing units here are owned by investors, people, not necessarily investors, but individuals. So it's not like there's a huge corporate presence in the housing market. And And so what we're dealing with is if people lose their jobs, whether you're a homeowner or renter, you lose your job, how are you going to pay rent or your mortgage? If you can't pay your mortgage, then if you can't pay rent to the homeowner, then the homeowner is going to be challenged to pay his or her mortgage. If that happens, or when that happens, then we're going to be seeing some major carnage because the value of properties go down when no one can afford it eventually. And so if that's, if that's where we're at or approaching, then what we're seeing is basically what we should expect to see is a major adjustment in the housing market. So when we look at this adjustment, so I spoke at length with Chaim Etkin. If you want to check out that at tribejournal.org, we got into this. His thoughts were that it would be a 25 to 30% freeze on the housing market, that the banks will be frozen. No one will be able to take their money out for a year. But basically the whole housing market will be adjusted by 25, 30%, which means that if you bought that 2 million shekel house, now it's going down, right? Let's say 25, 30%. If you bought a 3 million shekel house, it's only worth to the bank at least 2 or 2.2 million shekels. Why does that matter? Well, unless someone's paying a lot of cash, the bank is only going to give so much loans on that property because if Chaim is right, then that adjustment will basically wipe out the down payment, the cash down payment of 25% that everybody gave, and any appreciation, if it appreciated over time. So then, then they're losing the profits that they had on that property. The mortgage went down a significant amount, but still that's going to hurt anyone who is planning on that for their retirement or whatnot. The bottom line is that the people who are buying now should keep this in mind, because if Chaim's right, then that would basically mean that the market would eat that 25% down payment. Another way that societies can get out of this, and people are speculating that this will happen in the United States, is the United States has the opportunity to be the world currency, so they could simply inflate their way out of it. The Bank of Israel could do a similar tactic by lowering interest rates, making money really cheap, printing money, etc. It would hurt the shekel, obviously, and that's a big issue. But it could be that the play was actually to buy, and then they're just inflate, and so the debt that was once significant becomes the cost of a box of milk. That's with hyperinflation, of course. But so this is inflation could be a way out. And when you look at what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, the price of oil going up, etc. So it does look like we're entering stagflation, where unemployment's going up, the cost of oil is going up, and that could drive a stagflation era in our economic future here. So the other thing that might happen, is that government will have to step in. In other words, there'll be government assistance to government. I recently saw a headline now where they're talking about some 500 shekels to help certain people with mortgages. So if government assistance kicks in, that would be to keep the framework, which we all look at things, to sort of prop up the economy with government assistance. I don't know where that's coming from. I pay a lot of taxes on every shekel I earn here, and I pay a lot of taxes on my income. So I'm renting because I'm trying to be responsible. But to think that my tax payments would then go to pay for someone's interest payments on a mortgage, I'm not comfortable with that. But I guess we got to do what we got to do. It seems that according to, no matter which way you spin it, that if these things continue, then the K economy will get worse and worse. What do I mean by that? A K economy is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. By the way, I'm a capitalist. I don't want government housing. I don't think the government should do that. If there's a different way out, then, and we'll talk about a few of these potential ways soon. But capitalism is, I'm a big fan of working hard and succeeding and taking calculated risks and benefiting from that with Siyata Deshmaya, of course. But the government assistance puts a tremendous amount of power in the hands of the government. So if the K economy continues to worsen, let's say, in other words, if unemployment goes up, people don't have jobs, they have to tap into their savings. So that middle class begins to spend their money down in order to pay rent. So when does the government step in? If they wait till that middle class is completely, bankrupt, so to speak, then that would have wasted an opportunity for people right now to purchase a home with that down payment. So the weight game is actually working to the detriment of people who have money to buy a house, but are trying to be responsible and not pay for this inflated, artificially inflated market by, these 85,000 units that target mostly the more wealthy members of society. So what we're left with is a major issue, because if that K economy continues to exasperate, then people living where they are now won't be able to afford it, and they have to make a decision. If they have families, large families, they're going to get pushed out to the periphery where they may be able to find much cheaper rent. So we see that happening in real time, where people are struggling. Land owners are the apartment owners and the house owners are increasing the rent. My rent went up a tremendous amount. We have a survey on our website at tribejournal.org. A lot of people are mentioning in their comments in the survey how much their rent went up, some by 50%, but just thousands of shekels. For a lot of people trying to make it, it's a very difficult spike. Every year it goes up. And so, they don't see any protection in terms of laws that prevent, again, I'm not into government protection, but okay, we'll talk about this a little bit now, but we'll save it for another day, another podcast, another episode, because the way the tax structure works here is that the investors goes back 20 something years. For the past 20 years, there's been efforts by the government to write tax code that stimulates the construction industry. What that means is that if you have a person buying a house, let's say a person has money in the market's doing okay. S&P was 8%. Last year it was about 30%, last 365 days. But on average, like 8 to 15%, let's say year over year. I think even, earlier, if you just went from until like 2010, you're talking about 8% over decades and decades and decades. So it's a stable index fund for 8% ROI year after year without lifting a finger. But comes along the tax authority and they say, look, if you have, we're going to give a break for your taxes. You only have up to $5,000 that is tax free. So if you are charging rent, you own a second property and you're charging rent on that property, then you're tax free that $5,000. So basically, if you have money in the market and you cash out, you have to pay taxes on the capital gain. Here, the rent is coming in every year. The property is appreciating, right? It's going up in value year after year, and you're not cashing out, but the rent that's coming in is basically free money, and you can just roll that right into another property. So that has been going on for quite a while. That is a huge incentive to take money out of the market and put it into real estate. The other aspect is that if you don't take that, then maybe you make more than $5,000 in rental income. There's a 10% blanket rule, and that 10% income, that 10% tax rate on income is enormously beneficial compared to the regular income that most working people will pay. Because even just paying the taxes on your income versus paying taxes on this passive or active income, the passive income at a 10% rate. So it basically encouraged investors to put their money into real estate. But again, don't forget, the government, the Israel Land Authority and the KKL and the JNF are basically, they're the determinant of how much land gets released, how many properties are able to be built, whether they put a restriction, no more houses. It has to be two family houses side by side or on top, but no more cottages, they call them here. So, this is just a top down, manipulation of the market for whatever reasons, good or bad. That's what it is. And that's the way it goes. So what we're looking at is this huge push for decades for people to take their money out of the market, put it into real estate. What has resulted, a disproportionate amount of the top 10% of breadwinners own 2 or more properties. So a lot of the properties that are out there are basically owned by someone, a mom and pop, who are renting this thing out. Maybe they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 properties, who knows? But they're the ones renting it out. And so if people start losing their jobs, usually they don't have that big a pocket. They can't get a huge line of credit or whatever to save their property. So if the mortgage is not yet paid off, that's another consideration that could spell carnage in the future. So anyways, we could go on and on with all this. The big question is, where will we live? So I'm going to encourage everybody at this point, if you made it this far, take a look at tribejournal.org. We have 2 things that I want to encourage you. Number 1 is a survey to let us know that you exist, to let us know what your housing and hashkafa and, what your housing needs are. This survey is intended to bring people together so that we can make matches even and try to help people start new communities. When you go as a community somewhere, it's much different than when you are trying to buy as an individual into a community that an agent is trying to sell and market and whatnot and profit on. So I think there are opportunities like that where if we work together, we can try to make bigger things happen for the affordable housing class. The other aspect is there's a petition, and the petition has, it addresses some of the responsible tax policy issues that I mentioned and many other issues that we can get into in another episode. But I encourage everybody to go over to tribejournal.org and at a minimum sign that petition. Join us, strengthen our voice, give us the ability to talk to stakeholders and, people in government, people who are involved in these types of decisions and to really, amplify our voice, that together we'll be able to affect change in a very, very, very volatile time. This is not a simple time. It's really, really a daunting thing. We've been through daunting things here. We've had wars, we've had ballistic missiles. It's absolutely miraculous. Thank you, Hashem. And with the AI coming down the pipeline, unfortunately, as we've seen in the past, it seems that government usually responds when crisis hits. So this video is my call for people to join me in saying the crisis is here. You may be someone that's struggling financially. Again, that lawyer who's working at Walmart is not unemployed. The person who lost their job and they're struggling to find work is not unemployed. A lot of these people, my friends, they have families, they have kids in schools. This displacement and disruption is not simple. There's already a toll on a generation with war, and this is only going to exasperate things if it gets worse. So, I encourage everybody to join us. Let us know you exist. Say hi. If we do, we're actively working on identifying community builds because I anticipate that these builders are going to be struggling as well if the government doesn't intervene. So if people can come to the table together, maybe the builders can help make a deal. There's also communities that we're in discussion with that maybe these communities would like to expand, and they have the ability to open their doors to, some English speaking Olim and people who live here that are looking to get in there. And lastly, we're excited about 70,000 people making Aliyah. I think only 4,000 in 2025. I think only 4,000 came from North America, maybe 5,000. It's another small number. You have the majority of Jews living in it, in America. So the 70,000 did not come from America, from the United States. But we have to also remember that 50,000 people left. And 2 years ago, I took a survey and we found a lot of people who are struggling with rent and cost of living left Israel for places that they could afford to live. So this is a huge issue. There's a lot of people that come here with skills, and even so, they're struggling to make ends meet, especially doctors, for example, who take I have friends that are taking like a 10 to 20% pay cut. Sorry, they're making 10% of what they would be making there. And so if housing and, if housing is so expensive and, the life is so difficult, again, I'm not saying we're not up for the challenge, but, this is a democratic society. There are definitely systemic issues that we can take a look at. I'm done complaining. I will listen to complaints only so much, but when you hear complaints and then you research it, the picture becomes abundantly clear. I've been fortunate enough to speak to very influential people in government, serving government officials, NGOs, you name it. And there's a lot of opportunities. We're going to get into some of the actual cost of building a house, and why is it so expensive. But just to let you know, there are options, and we're going to be covering that on Israel housing disruption. So stay tuned, subscribe, let us know you exist. And I look forward to seeing you in the comments. There's nothing better. Right now, I'm literally in a room and I'm talking to a camera. But when you mention something in the comments or you give a like or a share, it definitely rings a little bell and helps us get the physic that someone's out there and benefiting from this. And the more people that benefit, the more we'll be inspired to create this content, to join together, and to raise our voices and rise together as a community, a digital community, and find other people who are doing similar things so that we can all work together. This is one of the biggest issues, I believe, and I'll talk about this in another episode, but I believe this is definitely one of the biggest issues out there right now, impacting Israelis everywhere. And I think that the window to actually do something about it is closing. It may close as almost as soon as it opens. So this statistic that we're looking at, to me, it shows that we are dealing with a major issue in the economy. This number is basically, about 1 in 6 people are struggling with 1 in 6 workers are struggling with money. So this is a big issue. Let's try to address it together. And Bezrat Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu, again, AI displacing the jobs is not a bad thing. Before Adam Arishon, right before the first person in Genesis, there was no work. The first sin is what caused work. So when we talk about the employment market, we're talking about, anyways, remembering that it is set up as a tax. It's not something that we want to do. So I'm looking forward to technology displacing jobs, but we would like this to happen in a responsible way that everyone can enjoy the world of abundance that is possible. So it's incredible to be here on this planet in this generation, and may we see happy occasions. May we all merit to see a world of abundance and peace speedily in our days. Thank you for joining me here on the Tribecast at tribejournal.org. I am JP Katz, your host, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Housing Disruption, a new podcast series by Tribe Journal, pulling the curtain back on the disruption to real estate in Israel. Brought to you by the Tribe Group, identifying and investing in affordable housing solutions so that everyone can thrive in a world of abundance. It's time for disruption. Streaming now on tribejournal.org.